There's a quote I want to share with you today by Paulo Coelho. It's don't allow your wounds to transform you into someone you are not. Don't allow your wounds to transform you into someone you are not. Now, listen, I so often people are like, I'm not doing that. That's not what I'm doing. Blah, 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 blah. We're going to dive into that today because all of us have been guilty of this at some point in our lives. And oftentimes it is an underlying theme to things that aren't the way we want them to be in our lives. All right, I'm Angela W. Stillwell. I am the CEO and founder of Untapped Strengths. And I work with individuals to transform them into top 1% leaders. And I work with teams to transform them into powerhouses. And a big part of that is understanding that we don't allow our wounds to make us someone that we're not. Okay. Look, we all have things that have happened in our past. I don't care if you had the best childhood in the world. There's something from your past that is probably defining something that you're doing in your present and will continue to define you into your future unless you decide that you want to shift it. Now, this starts out as a completely subconscious thing. And it, if you've heard me in the past, you've heard me talk about that our subconscious thoughts drive 90% of every decision we make, action we take, and result that we get. All right. So if this is a subconscious thought and it's driving that, and you're not even aware of it because it's subconscious, then unless you really dive into the work to say, I'm not 100% where I want to be right now. And look, none of us are ever 100% where we want to be. There's always room for growth. There's always room for growth. If there's no more room for growth, then you're not stretching enough. There's more to you and more in life that you can get if you are no longer growing. Look, if you're not growing, you're dying. Those are the two options, growing or dying. There's no status quo. There's no being stationary. That doesn't exist. It's either growing or dying. So if something isn't right where you want it to be, that's okay. I'm not saying don't be content where you are. You get to be content where you are. What I'm saying is, if there's something in your life that isn't right where you want it to be, right? And I'll dive into some examples in just a minute. But if there's something in your life that isn't where you want it to be, you get to be courageous enough to peel back the layers and look in and say, oh, I see that. Yeah, that's from XYZ, and I get to make shifts on that, right? So let's go into some, for instances, some examples. If you've listened to any of my lives, if you've read any of my posts, you've heard some of my childhood and my background and my growing years, and know that I came from an incredibly dysfunctional background. And for a long time, one of the things that excuse me, one of the things when I was 5 years old, I can remember my mom on the phone with my dad. And he was out of town and was promising that he'd be home. And he was notorious for not coming home when he would say he was coming home. And there's a whole lot behind all of that. But I can remember this conversation that my mom was having. And I could hear her end of the call, right? And this was way back when there was like one, maybe two phones in the whole house, and there was a really long cord on the phone. Very different than today, right? And I can remember her standing in the kitchen having this conversation, and I heard her begging him, and I could hear the sadness and the unhappiness in her voice. And I remember hearing that and thinking, I will never live like that. Like as a 5-year-old, I did a turnabout and I walked out and I went back to my room and marched my little 5-year-old self to my room thinking, I will never live my life like that. Now, great declaration to make. Okay. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with making that kind of a declaration in your life. What happened though was that I put up tons of walls. And so those walls were to protect me because as a 5-year-old that's what I knew, right? How do I get to keep myself safe? How do I get to protect myself because no one else is doing that? And so in that wall building process, what that started doing over time was impacting my relationships. It was impacting my ability to connect with people. And I didn't realize how impactful that was until I was going through a divorce. Many, many, many years later. I was in my mid 40s going through a divorce. And you know, that's a deep wound to impact a life for a really long time. And there've been others, right? There've been other things that, once you start doing the work on yourself, you get to be committed to doing that work. And I look, none of us are perfect. None of us are ever going to be perfect. And I'm not saying that everything in your life is wrong. I'm not saying that maybe you are 100% happy and it's great, perfect. Then you can turn this off and go about your business. For those of you, though, who are not at 100%, because remember, there's always room for growth. So the vast majority of us are not going to be at 100%. So if you're not at 100%, I just want to remind you, don't let your wounds be what determines who you become. Don't let your wounds determine who you become. And know this, it's not super apparent usually. It's something that is under a layer and under a layer and under a layer. It's one of the things when I'm coaching clients and they're like, I thought I'd already dealt with this. Yes, and once you deal with it, there's usually a deeper layer and a deeper layer and a deeper layer. Look, I didn't come to that thing about being the 5-year-old making that decision straight away when I started trying to figure out, okay, what do I get to do differently so that the rest of my life is better than it was, or so that I make better, deeper, more meaningful connections, more meaningful relationships. It wasn't straight away that I realized that it was walls built on a story that a 5-year-old made, right? And I'm not saying that you have to do, regression therapy or any of that kind of stuff. I'm just saying you get to acknowledge it and you get to decide what is the truth? What is the truth? Because the story that we tell ourselves about the wound is what creates who we become. So when you realize there's a wound there, and then you realize what is the story that you're telling yourself, okay? Those are not going to be conscious thoughts. Those are all subconscious thoughts. So once you finally get in there and you pull back and realize what the story is that you've been telling yourself, the meaning that you were putting to whatever event that was, right? That's where the impact is. It's the story and the meaning that you give to things that then create how you react, behave, etc. going forward and who you become. So what happens many, many times is that we think that we're alone in this process. And reality is we're not. We're not alone in the process. Or you may be isolating yourself so that you're alone, but you don't have to be alone. You can be part of a community. You get to be part of a community. And if you're really going to make big shifts in life, finding a community that can support you through that process is a game changer. And that community can consist of a coach, it can consist of the other people in that community. Look, there's a lot of different parts that are made up of a community. You need sounding boards, you need idea generators, you need all sorts of things within that community, right? I'm not saying that you have to have a community of thousands of people, but do find a community that shares in value, shares in the fact that you're wanting to step into your personal leadership. Okay. Because stepping into your personal leadership is a huge differentiator. The vast majority of people out there are not stepping into their leadership. They're not taking 100% responsibility 100% of the time. And that's not saying take the blame. That's not what I'm saying when I say 100% responsibility 100% of the time. The vast majority of people are pointing fingers at the economy, at their past, their wounds, right? Or the people of their past, or circumstances that they grew up in, so they can never become XYZ. And all of those things are fallacies if you choose for them to be. If you choose for them to be, that's the difference maker. So those wounds, don't allow those wounds to turn you into someone. Use those wounds as a stepping stone. How do you get to take those wounds from your past and use them in a way that launches you to the next level? Look, as a 5-year-old, I used that wound to launch me, because for a while those walls did work, right? They did work. They did what they needed to do when I was 5 years old, 7 years old, 10 years old, etc. Those walls did what they needed to do at that time, because there was a lot going on and there was very little that I had control over. The difference became once I then had control over the situation, over more situations in my life. As I got out on my own and started doing my own thing, there were things that I had control over, and yet I was still operating with those walls, because that became my way of being. If I had it to do over, I would love to have torn down those walls sooner. Again, they served me. They served me. So I'm not saying that there wasn't a time when whatever the wound is and whatever your response was, I'm not saying that hasn't served you in some form or fashion, because usually it does. And you get to decide, do you want to continue with that story, with those beliefs, with that meaning that you're giving it, or do you want to shift it? Right? And if you want to change things in your life, you get to examine all of that and go, okay, I get to shift that now, right? It's no longer serving me. So when I saw that quote the other day, I just, I was like, man, I can so relate to that. I can so relate to that. What about you? Is there some wound that you're recognizing now that has made you be someone you don't want to be? Or maybe it's still keeping you from becoming who you ultimately want to be, or the relationships that you want to have, spiritually, financially, intimately, whatever that might look like. Maybe you've been through a divorce and figured some stuff out and realized that there were some wounds there. Maybe you were fired from a job and there's a wound from that aspect. And there's a lot of different things that happen in life. I'm not going to sit here and name all of them, right? I can't name all of them. You get to look at your life and say, here's where I am. Here's what I love about me and my life. Here's what I'd like to shift. And those things that you want to shift, you get to say, okay, what did I do to get myself to here? What do I get to do to get myself out of here? And what is it that led me to this? I take clients through a whole process so that we can peel all of that back and then work on it for a while so that you write new neural pathways. But can't get into that today. There's a whole process for that. So anyway, listen, I would love for you to be part of my community. There's a couple of different things you can do. I have a resource for you. That's the word I'm looking for, resource. I have a resource that can help you kind of uncover some of those things, some of those blind spots that are keeping you stuck. If you go to the link that you see on the screen, there is a button that has that resource that you can get downloaded straight away and get access to that. So, anyway, I look forward to hearing from you. I can't wait to hear some of the things that maybe have been impacting your life. And I hope you have a fantastic Wednesday and a great remainder to your week. And I will see you next week.